The story of modern China begins, a narrative woven from threads of revolution, resilience, and reinvention. It begins with the dramatic collapse of its last imperial dynasty, the Qing, a dynasty that once stood as an unshakable pillar of power. The fall of the Qing wasn't just a regime change, it was the shattering of a centuries-old order. For centuries, the Qing ruled a vast empire, stretching from the steppes of Central Asia to the shores of the Pacific, a realm of immense wealth and cultural influence. Their emperors held absolute authority, presiding over a complex bureaucracy and a society steeped in tradition. But by the early 20th century, the Qing dynasty was a shadow of its former self. Internal decay, corruption, and a rigid adherence to outdated practices had weakened it from within, while foreign aggression chipped away at its borders and sovereignty. Defeats in wars with Western powers and Japan exposed the Qing's military and technological inferiority. These conflicts were not just territorial disputes, they were a clash of civilizations, revealing China's vulnerability in the face of modern warfare. These defeats forced China into a series of humiliating treaties, ceding territory, granting extraterritorial rights to foreigners, and draining its wealth through hefty reparations and unequal trade agreements. These concessions fueled resentment and a growing sense of national humiliation. Massive rebellions like the Taiping Rebellion, a devastating civil war that lasted for over a decade, exposed the dynasty's deep weaknesses and its inability to maintain order and provide for its people. The dynasty's struggles left the central government financially exhausted and increasingly reliant on regional warlords, powerful military figures who controlled vast territories and operated with near total autonomy. This decentralization of power further eroded the Qing's authority. Peasant poverty, exacerbated by frequent famines and rampant corruption among officials, fueled revolutionary ideas and a growing desire for change. Secret societies and revolutionary groups began to emerge, advocating for the overthrow of the Qing and the establishment of a new, modern China. In 1911, a seemingly minor mutiny in Wuchang, a city in central China, ignited a spark that would quickly engulf the entire country. This uprising sparked the Xinhai Revolution, a widespread revolt against Qing rule, fueled by years of pent-up frustration and a yearning for a better future. Inspired by the Wuchang uprising, province after province declared independence from the Qing dynasty, joining the revolutionary cause and further weakening the already fragile imperial government. The imperial court, isolated and powerless to stop the tide of revolution, finally abdicated in early 1912, bringing an end to centuries of dynastic rule. The last emperor, Puyi, a young boy who had ascended the throne at the age of 2, stepped down, marking the end of an era. This abdication brought an end to over 2,000 years of imperial rule in China, a system of governance that had shaped the country's culture, society, and political landscape for millennia. The fall of the Qing dynasty ushered in a new, uncertain era for China, a period of upheaval, experimentation, and ultimately, transformation. The old order was gone, but what would replace it remained to be seen. With the emperor gone, revolutionaries founded the Republic of China led by Sun Yat-sen, whose vision was built on nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood, lacking military power. Sun handed leadership to Yuan Shikai, a powerful general hoping for unity. Yuan betrayed the republic, dissolved parliament, and declared himself emperor, but his rule quickly collapsed. After Yuan's death in 1916, China fragmented into territories ruled by warlords, each fighting for power. Ordinary people suffered under constant warfare, heavy taxes, and lawlessness. The dream of a unified, democratic China faded as the country descended into chaos. The stage was set for new political forces to emerge. The early 20th century in China was a period defined by immense upheaval and fragmentation. The Qing dynasty had collapsed, leaving a power vacuum. Warlords carved up the country, and amidst this chaos, two distinct political forces began to rise, each with a vision for a unified and modern China. The first was the Nationalist Party, also known as the Kuomintang, which was reorganized and revitalized by Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen sought to establish a democratic republic, drawing inspiration from Western models while adapting them to the Chinese context. The second force was the Chinese Communist Party, a relatively new movement inspired by the recent success of the Russian Revolution and the spread of Marxist ideology. Recognizing the need for a strong military to achieve national unification, Sun Yat-sen sought support from the Soviet Union. With Soviet advisors and resources, Sun built a disciplined and modern army capable of challenging the warlords. This army was trained at the Whampoa Military Academy, producing a new generation of military officers, including figures like Chiang Kai-shek, who would later play a pivotal role in China's destiny. Within the Communist Party, leaders like Mao Zedong began to emerge, advocating for a different path to revolution, one that focused on the vast rural population of China. Unlike the nationalists, who primarily focused on urban centers and the educated elite, the communists sought to mobilize the peasants, who constituted the overwhelming majority of the Chinese population, promising land reform and social justice. For a time, the nationalists and communists formed an uneasy alliance, putting aside their ideological differences to focus on the common goal of defeating the warlords and unifying China under a single government. However, this alliance was fragile and short-lived. After Sun Yat-sen's death in 1925, Chiang Kai-shek, who had risen to prominence within the Nationalist Party, began to view the communists as a threat to his power and the future direction of China. In 1927, Chiang launched a violent purge of the communists, brutally suppressing their organizations and killing thousands of their members in what became known as the Shanghai Massacre. This act of betrayal shattered the alliance between the nationalists and communists, plunging China into a long and bloody civil war that would last for decades. Facing overwhelming force from the nationalist army, the communists were forced to retreat from their urban strongholds and establish rural bases in the countryside. It was in these rural bases that Mao Zedong developed his unique strategy of peasant mobilization, adapting Marxist theory to the specific conditions of China and building a revolutionary movement from the ground up. The stage was set for a long, bitter struggle for China's future, a conflict that would determine the fate of the nation and its people. The seeds of revolution and civil war had been sown, and the harvest would be one of immense suffering and profound transformation. As civil war raged, Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, exploiting China's weakness. The Japanese established a puppet state and launched a brutal campaign, including the infamous Rape of Nanjing. Under public pressure, nationalists and communists formed a fragile alliance to resist Japan. The war devastated China, with millions killed and cities destroyed. The nationalists fought a war of attrition, while the communists waged guerrilla warfare and gained peasant support. After 8 years of suffering, China emerged battered but unbowed, playing a key role in the Allied victory. Yet the end of World War II brought no peace, only a return to civil war. With Japan defeated and World War II finally at an end, a power vacuum emerged in China. The long and arduous war against the Japanese had severely weakened both the nationalist and communist forces, but it was the beginning of a new chapter in Chinese history. The nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists under Mao Zedong, raced to seize control of the country. The fragile truce that had existed during the war against Japan was shattered, and the stage was set for a full-blown civil war. Despite substantial U.S. aid to the nationalist government, including military equipment and financial support, the tide began to turn against them. The Americans hoped to bolster the nationalists and prevent the spread of communism in Asia. The nationalist government was increasingly crippled by widespread corruption. High-ranking officials embezzled funds, resources were mismanaged, and the general population suffered as a result. This corruption eroded public trust and fueled resentment towards the government. The situation was further exacerbated by economic collapse and hyperinflation, which devastated the lives of ordinary citizens. The economic hardship led to widespread protests and a significant loss of public support for the nationalist cause. The communists, led by the charismatic and ideologically driven Mao Zedong, presented themselves as a viable alternative. They promised a new China, free from corruption and foreign influence. The communists won the loyalty of the vast peasant population through promises of land reform, offering them a chance to own and cultivate their own land. This resonated deeply with the rural population, who had long suffered under a feudal system. The People's Liberation Army was known for its strict discipline and commitment to the communist cause. This contrasted sharply with the Nationalist Army, which was plagued by corruption and low morale. The Chinese Civil War resumed in 1946, with both sides vying for control of key territories and resources. The war was brutal and devastating, further weakening the country after years of conflict. The Communists' People's Liberation Army steadily gained momentum, winning crucial battles and expanding their control over vast swaths of territory. Their effective military strategies and strong popular support proved decisive. The PLA inflicted a series of defeats on the nationalist forces in key battles, pushing them further and further back. The nationalist army suffered heavy losses and struggled to maintain its position. By 1949, the nationalist government was on the verge of collapse, its authority crumbling under the weight of military defeats and internal strife. The writing was on the wall. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of the nationalist government fled to the island of Taiwan, establishing a separate regime that claimed to be the legitimate government of China. On October 1, 1949, a pivotal moment in Chinese history unfolded. Mao Zedong stood in Tiananmen Square in Beijing and proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China, ushering in a new era for the nation. The communist victory marked the end of a century of foreign humiliation and internal division, a period of immense suffering and instability for the Chinese people. It also began a new era of revolutionary change, with the communists determined to transform China into a socialist society. This transformation would have profound and lasting consequences. However, the split with Taiwan created a lasting dilemma, leaving the island under separate governance and with a complex relationship with the mainland. This division continues to shape cross-strait politics and international relations to this day, remaining one of the most sensitive and complex geopolitical issues in the world. The new communist government launched sweeping reforms, redistributing land, improving literacy, and expanding women's rights. Political campaigns targeted perceived enemies, consolidating party control, but causing widespread suffering. In 1958, Mao's Great Leap Forward aimed to rapidly industrialize China, but led to disastrous famine and millions of deaths. After setbacks, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution in 1966, mobilizing youth to attack old ideas and rivals. The decade-long chaos shattered society, destroyed cultural heritage, and left deep scars. Schools closed, intellectuals were persecuted, and the economy nearly collapsed. By Mao's death in 1976, China was exhausted and in need of a new direction. The nation stood at a crossroads, ready for change. After Mao's death, Deng Xiaoping rose to power, rejecting class struggle for pragmatic reform. Deng's reform and opening up dismantled communes, allowed private enterprise, and welcomed foreign investment. Rural reforms boosted food production and incomes, while cities became engines of growth. China's economy boomed, lifting hundreds of millions from poverty and transforming society. But rapid growth brought inequality, corruption, and environmental crises. Political reform lagged, and in 1989 calls for democracy erupted in Tiananmen Square. The government's violent crackdown sent a clear message. Economic freedom was allowed, but political dissent was not. China's path was set, prosperity in exchange for obedience. Despite the Tiananmen crackdown, Deng's reforms continued, fueling explosive growth through the 1990s and 2000s. China became the world's factory, joined the WTO, and built a vast middle class. Cities transformed, millions migrated for work, and the 2008 Beijing Olympics showcased China's rise. With economic power came global ambition. China invested abroad, modernized its military, and asserted itself on the world stage. But growth brought pollution, inequality, and social tension. The government tightened control over information, using censorship to maintain stability. The bargain remained prosperity for political obedience. China's transformation was remarkable, but challenges loomed. Xi Jinping's rise in 2012 marked a new era of centralized power and assertive nationalism. Xi removed term limits, launched anti-corruption campaigns, and promoted ideological conformity. Civil society was suppressed, and dissent tightly controlled. China's Belt and Road Initiative expanded its global influence, while relations with the US and others grew tense. The COVID-19 pandemic tested the state's control, with strict policies bringing both success and hardship. China leads in technology but faces scrutiny at home and abroad. Today, China stands at a crossroads. Economic transformation achieved, but facing demographic, environmental, and political challenges. The world watches as China's next chapter unfolds. Its choices will shape the 21st century.